What does upgrading from the PS4 to the PS5 have to do with the Old Testament and the New Testament? Today on Geek Devotions, we're going to talk about that. Hello, Devoted Geeks, and welcome to Geek Devotions, a show from Devoted Geeks who are devoted to letting you know you're loved. I'm Dallas, and I'm so glad that you've hit the play button today. If you're new to our show, we take geek pop culture items like movies, video games, comics, and we use them to let you know you're loved. So if you don't watch past this moment right here, right now, know this: we love you. Care about you. There is a plan and a purpose for your life. Do not give up. So recently we've had some problems with our PS4 here at Geek Devotions. It's dying. Like, I can't play any games on it whatsoever anymore. I get this weird error code, and I did everything I could last weekend to try to fix it and bring it back to life. I reset the database. I went to reformat it. I took it back to base. I did everything I could, and it just is not working. I was kind of sad about it. I was kind of frustrated with it for multiple reasons. One, I still have several games that I've yet to finish playing. Celeste has several games that she wants to play, but she hasn't had a chance to finish them up yet. And then at the same time, we use it here for Geek Devotions. And so I was kind of frustrated. I was trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he's like, well, just get a PS5 now. So I was like, I don't want to get a PS5. I have things still to do with the PS4 stuff. And that's when he goes, you do know the PS5 will play PS4 games. This was a revelation to me. I had no idea. I was so excited. And so now Celeste and I are trying to save up money and buy a PS5 here in a few months, hopefully. We'll see what happens. But that got me thinking about this whole thing about upgrading and the backwards compatibility of certain things, because to be honest, that's been a holdback for me with the whole PS5 stuff. And because I hate the struggle of not being able to do things that are backwards compatible. But it also got me thinking about some people struggle with the conversation about the Old Testament and the New Testament. What good is the Old Testament? What's the point of it if we have this New Testament, this new covenant under Jesus? What carries over? What doesn't carry over? And so I want to talk about that, because to be honest, guys, I want you guys to understand there are things from the Old Testament that genuinely are backwards compatible in the New Testament era. In fact, if you read the whole book of Hebrews, it's basically one big guide to the backwards compatibility of the Old Testament. That being said, I want to break down a few things. Some people, they have this mindset that Jesus, under the New Testament, nothing in the Old Testament matters. It's all thrown out the window. Goodbye. And that's just not the case. If you read in the scriptures in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, Jesus says this: do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Meaning Jesus didn't come to get rid of the Old Testament altogether, but to fulfill what was put in place there. Because what we discover, and Jesus says this many times, and several times in the New Testament, it says this, that everything in the Old Testament was meant to point to Jesus. It was this, what we call the scarlet thread, that goes through from Genesis all the way through to point to Jesus and his coming as the Messiah, his death, his resurrection, and his second return. That's what the whole thing is for. At the same time, when he talks about the Old Testament law, he takes it to another level. He says things simply like you've heard you're not supposed to murder. Yeah, you're not. But at the same time, you shouldn't have hate in your heart for your brother, because that's the same thing as murder. You've heard that you shouldn't have an affair. You shouldn't be an adulterous individual. Well, that's true. But at the same time, you shouldn't even look at a person with lust in your heart, because that's the same thing. So he takes what's in the Old Testament and he kind of clarifies it and makes it a little bit better. And this is real akin to like how the PS5 is so much more powerful than the PS4. It does a lot of the basic stuff, but it's cleaner than the PS4 was. And that's what's taking place in the New Testament. It's a lot like the Old Testament, but it makes things a little bit more clearer and a little bit better. And top of that, Jesus even simplifies things into one sentence. There was a teacher who came to Jesus and he's like, hey, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus boils it down in Matthew chapter 22. He says this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second one is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the law and the prophets. So again, this is Jesus. He goes, look, everything you're reading in the Old Testament, comes down to this: Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And the problem was that Pharisees had taken it and complicated some very simple things that God presented in the Old Testament to an nth degree. And he's like, whoa, you've missed the point. There's something internal that needs to take place. And that is the point of the Old Testament. And because of that, Jesus is fulfilling everything, because it became impossible for people to make God happy under what was taking place. It became impossible for them to really fulfill what's going on. And Jesus paid the ultimate sacrifice to fulfill the law and establish a new covenant where there was some very basic, simple things that put in place. Like I said in front of things, there's a lot of things from the Old Testament that do carry over to the New Testament. There are a lot of things that were said and done in the Old Testament, some law basic stuff, the principles of which carry over to today. This is much akin to like how, like I said, PS4 games do work in a PS5. Only now in a PS5, they run a little bit better. They're a little smoother. They look a little better. This is the kind of what Jesus was talking about in the Beatitudes when he was kind of upgrading, if you will, these Old Testament laws and sayings. That said, there are some things in the Old Testament that don't carry over. And these are simply because like they just don't work in, they don't apply, period. And it's not a, well, society has changed type of thing. It's just that situations have changed completely, such as the laws about making regular animal sacrifices. Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice so that there are no more animal sacrifices. And this is akin to like how an old PS1 controller simply doesn't work with the PS5. The connector simply doesn't work. Old animal sacrifices no longer connect you with God. They no longer do anything for your atonement and to make it so that you can be with the Father. The only way to God now is through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. So the question becomes, what's the point of reading the Old Testament? I got three simple things. There's a lot to it, a lot more to it, but three simple things. One, it gives us a better insight into the nature and character of God. That is a key aspect. If we only go off the New Testament, we're missing a whole history of who God is that is dictated in the Old Testament. And I want to tell you guys, it's the same God from the beginning to the end. It's one God. It's the same God. He doesn't change. The problem is that people have taken segments out and they've gone, well, look how God responded here. He's a terrible individual. You've missed the bigger picture of everything taking place. Or maybe they've segmented on one thing and like, oh, he's so loving and caring and doesn't care about anything you do. It's all good. And you've missed a whole bunch of other things too. We need the entire testimony of the scriptures as a whole, old and new, to truly understand the nature and character of God. And also, on top of that, reading the Old Testament, this is number two, helps us to understand what's happening in the New Testament. There's a lot of things that take place in the New Testament that don't make sense if you don't read the Old Testament. There's a lot of things that Jesus teaches that point back to the Old Testament that you won't really get the gravity of you don't understand the Old Testament. And finally, the Bible in the New Testament says simply this: all scripture is good for teaching and for rebuke. And this is Paul's teaching to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 through 17. Now, when he's writing this is a personal letter to Timothy, he's not talking about just the Gospels that were being written. Not all the Gospels were even written when when Paul wrote this to Timothy. He's talking about the entirety of scriptures. The Old Testament is good for teaching, for rebuke, for encouragement. That's why we need the Old Testament. That's why we need to read it. Yes, we've upgraded to a PS5. We've upgraded to the New Covenant, and it's great. It's awesome. It's clean. It's fresh, and it's amazing. But that there are things from the Old Testament era that still apply today. And we have to read through it. We have to try to understand it. We have to be cognitive of it. There are some things, yes, that don't apply. And we have to be aware of that. If I can challenge you guys with something, take a look at the book of Hebrews and read through Hebrews, because Hebrews was written to a group of people who are now trying to understand what it meant to be Jewish in a new covenant era. Because there's a lot of things, their mindset of how things worked, a lot of things that they did, that they didn't understand how it applied today. And so the writer of Hebrews is like, hey, let me kind of give you this manual to help you understand what is happening under this new covenant of Jesus Christ. Question of the week for you guys. What is your favorite Old Testament story? Leave a comment down below and let me know. That being said, I do want to encourage you guys to be part of our community here at Geek Devotions. If you're like, hey, I'm trying to get into the Bible, I want to understand more, I want to read more. Every Monday night, we do a reading through the scriptures. We're actually in the Old Testament right now. We're reading through the book of 1 Samuel. It's been really interesting, and it's getting a little wild for King David right now. So if you guys want to be part of that, hang out with us on Monday nights. We're on Twitch and YouTube, and at 7 p.m. every Monday night for our Monday night play and pray. Also invite you guys to become be part of our community on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all that kind of places, and take part in our Discord. Develop friendships, develop community, grow together. And lastly, I want to give a big thank you to our devoted Patreon geeks who help support us here at Geek Devotions. Thanks to them, we're able to do what we do on a week-to-week basis. And honestly, like I said, just certain things that we wouldn't be able to do. I'm not taking, and I want to put this out there, we're not going to go and take Patreon money right now and go buy a PS5. We try our best to be good stewards of what is given to us so we can create content to let people know the love and they're cared for. Just this past week, Celeste and I had the opportunity to love on one particular individual who had just had questions. They were trying to understand things. And because of the support of our devoted Patreon geeks, we're able to do that in a really cool way. So thank you, devoted Patreon geeks. And if you want to help support what we do here, go to geekdevotions.com and click on our support page. And also check out the website period, because we have all kinds of content. We have podcasts, we have articles, we have different things come out on a regular basis. They're designed to encourage people, let them know they're loved and they're cared for, and all through a geeky and Christian worldview. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay devoted, peace and love.